Ladies and gentlemen, it is my great pleasure to introduce the U.S. Deputy Secretary of State, Thomas Nides. We're thrilled to have Deputy Secretary Nides with us today. As Secretary Clinton's deputy, number 2 of the Secretary of State, he leads on some of the most crucial issues affecting the United States in its relations with the world. He spearheads the U.S. government's use of economic policy to secure U.S. leadership, helping to ensure a healthy competition and promote economic growth around the world. He is also in charge of building the U.S. budget for diplomacy and foreign assistance, as well as being a leading authority on energy security. What many of you also may not know is that Deputy Secretary Nides is one of the key figures responsible for enhancing U.S. cooperation with Afghanistan, Iraq, and Pakistan, trying to answer questions such as, what kind of role should the U.S. play in Afghanistan's economic development? How can the U.S. best balance Pakistan's sovereignty with America's national security interests? And how can we ensure that progress in the region continues even as the U.S. military draws down? Secretary Nides brings to this position not only an impressive government resume, but also valuable experience working in the real world of business at some of the financial sector's biggest, most influential companies. I'll come to why that's so important. Also on Capitol Hill, Deputy Secretary Nides has held key positions in offices where some real work has been done and where real decisions were made. He's worked in the offices of the Majority Whip of the House of Representatives, the Speaker of the House, and served as Chief of Staff to the United States Trade Representative. His superb political skills and experience in Washington proved indispensable when he transitioned to the private sector, serving as Chief Operating Officer of investment giant Morgan Stanley. Deputy Secretary Nides joins us today to speak as a leading authority on how the United States can leverage economic diplomacy to improve the efficacy of our foreign policy, a concept the State Department is calling economic statecraft. We at the Atlantic Council have started kicking around an idea that perhaps the era we live in today, it's certainly not a Cold War, it's certainly not the post-Cold War era. We're increasingly looking at it as an era of global competition. And in an era of global competition, economic statecraft plays an increasingly important role. One element of this, which is an issue I know is extremely relevant to our audience here today, is the role of travel and tourism, and interlinked with that, of course, is the questions of visa waiver. Secretary Nides, we look very much forward to your insights on the economic strength of the U.S., how that affects America's global diplomatic presence, and how all this relates to Central Europe as a thriving economic region and key partner to the U.S. So with that, let me turn over to you to give us some opening comments, and with what time we have left, we'll also kick around some questions. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Fred. Thank you, Mr. Mayor. It's a very beautiful city. I've never been here before, and it reminds me of Chicago, so I like the feel. So thank you very much, and I'm honored to be here. Fred, thank you for inviting me. I originally was not planning to be here, but Fred pointed out to me that he has the ability to pull people together in Washington and in Poland, and it's clear by the folks that he has been able to pull that off. And so his influence is across the pond. You should understand that the Atlantic Council has a great reputation in Washington and around the world, principally because of the work that you do. So I'm honored to be here on behalf of the United States government, and I'm honored to be a participant. Mr. Ambassador, we have our great ambassador, Mr. Feinstein, who, as you know, is probably as good a representative that the United States has ever had here in Poland. He cares deeply about this relationship, and he is a dogged advocate on behalf of the United States, but on behalf of the citizens of Poland. So I'm honored that you could be here as well, and thank you for the emails encouraging me to come. So I appreciate it very much. Let me just be clear that it's a pleasure to be here to reaffirm America's partnership with the countries of Central and Eastern Europe. We take special pride in our strong historical cultural ties to Poland. And as you know, just this week, Jan Karski was honored by President Obama with the Presidential Medal of Freedom, the Americans' most senior, quite frankly, the most prestigious award a civilian could receive. Karski, as you all know, was a hero to the Polish resistance and later was a professor in the United States, so we feel a little bit of an ownership as well. We're honored to have joined Poland and celebrate his legacy, and nothing could overshadow our deep friendship. Karski's story is one of many that exemplifies the closeness of America and Eastern Europe. The simple truth is that people in the United States and Eastern Europe are steadfast friends. Look at any of the great challenges facing the world, and you'll find America standing shoulder to shoulder with the Europeans. Europe is our partner of first resort. And that's the first point I'd like to make today. In our diplomacy, the United States and Europe have never been more closely aligned. We are united and held together an unprecedented coalition in Libya. We remain united in our efforts to sharpen the choice facing Iran's leaders, and working side by side on both tracks to pressure the engagement with Iran. We are united in our support with the Syrian people who deserve the end of violence and the start of a political transition. And we're united in our efforts to finish the business of building a Europe which is whole, free, and at peace. Just 2 weeks ago, we stood united at the NATO summit in Chicago, where we made progress in everything from ballistic missiles defense to Afghanistan. And as President Obama said, Europe remains the cornerstone of our engagement with the world. And we especially value our friendship with our host and NATO ally, Poland. When we were forced to withdraw our diplomatic staff from Damascus for their safety, Poland stepped in and took our responsibility to serve as our protecting power for U.S. interests in Syria. This was a huge undertaking, and we are deeply in your gratitude. It's clear that our diplomatic partnership has never been stronger. Today, however, I want to talk about our economic dimension of this partnership. And that leads me to my second point, that U.S.-European economic partnership is the key to everything we want to do together around the world. Strong economies hold out the promise of successful nations, as you all know. Strong economies fund strong budgets for diplomacy, for development, and for defense. And so in the world of many powers, the transatlantic alliance must rest on a foundation of economic strength. Together, the United States and Europe have launched the most effective system for creating broad-based economic growth and stability the world has ever seen. One that welcomed Eastern Europe after the fall of the Berlin Wall. And today, as Europe continues to shake off the last global recession, we are invested economically and strategically in Europe's recovery. We should not sugarcoat the fact that we face real challenges. Economies on both sides of the Atlantic are facing fierce economic competition from more companies in more sectors in more places than ever before. In America as well as Europe, too many people, unfortunately, are still looking for jobs, and too many young people are still struggling to launch their careers. And as responsible governments, we need to use everything in our toolbox, including diplomacy, to improve our competitiveness and strengthen our economic fundamentals and achieve economic growth. As Secretary Clinton often says, that economic strength and global leadership are fundamentally a package deal. We must work together to shore up both of them. We call this renewed focus on economics within our foreign policy economic statecraft. In just about every country on the planet, U.S. diplomats, policymakers, and practitioners at all levels are thinking more and more about how we harness economic forces to build a better future for the American people and our allies. As we look to the future, it's clear that it's not just enough to look east or south to Latin America. Europe must be the center of our economic renewal. A sober assessment of our economic interests and a clear focus on economic statecraft leads us squarely back to our partner of choice on so many global challenges. That is Europe. While emerging market captures a lot of headlines recently, the U.S. economic relationship with Europe remains the largest and the most complex in the world. It is responsible for trade flows of about $3.5 billion per day. Transatlantic investment is directly responsible for 7.5 million jobs. In 2010, the U.S. invested more than twice as much in Europe as we did in any other region in the world. And we received 4 times more investments from where we did from any other region into the United States. The importance of Europe's economy to America's and America's economy to Europe's is undeniable. And yet, as you know better than most, there's plenty of economic opportunities left to seize. There is no reason why the United States and Europe shouldn't have an economic relationship that is every bit as compelling as our diplomatic and security cooperation is around the world. We can and we must do more. The Polish-American Business Summit next month is a great opportunity for our countries to focus on this, with the ambassador we'll be leading in June. And that leads me to my third point. What we are doing together to realize the economic potential of the U.S.-European partnership. I won't bore you, thank God, with all and every item on our agenda for advancing this partnership, but I want to briefly highlight a few of the key things that we're doing together and what we're doing to work on this economic agenda. First, we need to encourage our companies to trade and invest more with within each other's economies. There's still so much we can do to break down the barriers in doing business among our countries. We need to harmonize regulatory frameworks across the Atlantic, as Fred well knows. Through the Transatlantic Economic Council, we're working in areas of regulatory cooperation, intellectual property rights, investment, competition, government procurement, and the list goes on and on. But it's not just free flow of goods and ideas. It's about more than getting rules right for trading. It's about making it easier for our citizens to visit each other and study, to do business and be tourists. Tourism is the part of the lifeblood of our economic relationship and a major source of economic growth on both sides of the Atlantic. Governments on both sides of the Atlantic need to do more to make this possible. And that is why, my friends, the Obama administration strongly supports expanding the visa waiver program to include Poland. Legislation that could open the door to Poland's participation in that program is in fact possible by the end of this year. And we want to move quickly if the legislation gets passed. We continue to work with the Polish government to ensure the right agreements are in place to bring Poland into the program as soon as possible. Getting these agreements signed and opening the travel between our countries would be good for our people and good for both of our economies. Second, the U.S. and Europe needs to promote our economic values around the world to help build a stable and healthy international economic system. Eastern Europeans who suffered under communism understands better than anyone the importance of open and free and transparent and a fair system of economic competition. But the global economic order we've built together over the last 60 years does not sustain itself. We must constantly defend and promote the values that underpin it. So Americans and Europeans must stand together with our companies that face unfair practices or arbitrary obstacles to competition. Together, we must ensure that the entrepreneurial fire that has fueled the rise of tens of millions of people out of poverty is not snuffed out by corruption and cronyism. Third, America and Europe must use our economic tools to tackle the strategic and diplomatic challenges that we face. We must use sanctions and the likes to pressure those who break international rules and threaten international security, and we must use economic incentives to drive political reform. You see, our focus on economics is not just about creating jobs in our own countries. It's also about using the economic strength to advance our strategic interests around the world and to build a more stable future for everyone. The focus on economic tools is also driving our approach to immediate challenges that we face globally. Take Iraq for an example. The United States and Europe have worked hard to encourage investments by Western companies in Iraq. Why, you may ask? Because we recognize that the continued progress and stability in Iraq depends in large part on whether average Iraqis benefit from the new peace and whether their leaders are invested in maintaining it. It's the same reason Americans and Europeans are supporting the New Silk Road initiative in Central Asia. It is the same reason that 25 years ago, the United States led the world to invest in Poland and her neighbors. And it's the same reason that we must together help to aspire democracies in the Middle East and North Africa so they can deliver economic as well as political hope to their people. I have no doubt that our European friends, especially our Eastern European friends, will join us in this effort because nobody understands the stakes more clearly than you do. And as we look to our future, it should be clear that we have high expectations for what we can achieve together. We have high expectations for what business and government can achieve by working closer together towards a common goal of widespread economic growth. We have high expectations for our recovery and even higher expectations for Europe. And that is a good thing because the stakes could not be higher for democracy, for prosperity, or for stability. The freedom and prosperity that the Europeans and Americans enjoy today is not a birthright. It is an achievement. So let us commit ourselves, America and Europe together, to strengthen the economic cornerstone of a more prosperous, secure, and peaceful world. Thank you all very much.
Thank you, Secretary Nides. I, as an old newsman, some would say recovering journalist of the Wall Street Journal, may have picked up some news in that statement. So let me drill down on that just to make sure that I'm right. Visa waiver possible by the end of the year. It's pretty interesting if you're living in Poland. This has been going on for a long time. Can you drill down on this a little bit more? Does this mean you'll push, State Department will push, Obama administration will push to get it done by the end of the year? One might say even before the elections. And secondarily, what's the importance of this? What's the importance of this for the United States? Does this fit into economic statecraft in some form?
Well, you are a good newsman. Let me just step back and make sure everyone clearly understands. President Obama made it very clear to all of us at the State Department, within the agencies that are involved in the visa waiver programs, that he very much wants to get this done for Poland by the end of the year. We are fixated on trying to allow the visa waiver program in place. Now, as many of you know who follow the process in Congress, we don't control the Congress as much as I'd like to say we do. But unfortunately, it's that whole political party thing that works, and it doesn't always work out favorably, as Fred may know. But I think this is one of the few times where there is bipartisan support. There is a desire among Democrats and Republicans to get this done. And not to bore you with the kind of legislation, how it all works, but legislation has been introduced in the United States Senate and about ready to be introduced in the House, called the JOLT Act, which again, I don't want to get into a whole variety of what all these terms mean, but the bottom line, it's basically been done for the sole purpose, which I'm sure my staff's not going to like me saying, but the purpose principally is to get Poland into the visa waiver program. So we are working tirelessly to get this done, because let's be clear, this relationship with Poland, I don't think there's a stronger bilateral relationship in the world between the United States and a country as it is between Poland. Not only are we allies, but we're friends. And oh, by the way, there's a lot of Polish Americans as well in the United States, and they want to see their families. They want to have easy access back and forth. We want your money to come to the United States. So to be honest with you, it's not totally without self-interest. And I know you'd like to spend it, so we want to make it as easy as possible for you to do it. So I'd like to say this is one of those win-win situations. So we are committed to try to get this done. Obviously, I don't control the Congress, but we will be working tirelessly to get this done because I think it's the right thing to do. It's good for the people, the citizenry of Poland, and it's also good for the citizenry of the United States. And when that happens, these things tend to get done. So I'm very much focused on this, and you are a good newsman.
Because I just want to help people write the third or fourth paragraphs in this story. What are the odds of it getting done by the end of the year, and what stands between us and that?
You know, I'm not a bookie, unfortunately. Although I think I should probably be one. But I think it is. We're going to work on this very tirelessly, and I think that like anything, as you know, some of the obstacles that are created here is things that both our governments need to work on, especially as it relates to some data sharing activities which we're working on. My view of this is, again, there's a real desire. You have some real advocates. Not only do you have the President of the United States and the White House and the State Department with Hillary Clinton wanting to get this done. As you know, she's talked about this a lot. You also have some members of the Senate and the House that really want to get it done. And these aren't just members of the Senate who have large Polish communities, although that doesn't hurt either. But again, I think we just got to keep the pressure up. There is a desire in this administration to get this done. So I'm confident that we're moving in the right direction, and I hope when I visit here next, if Fred invites me back, this will be completed. Then I'll invite you back very soon. We don't have much time with you, sadly, but to use the time most efficiently, I've gathered a couple of questions from people in the audience. Eurozone. This isn't a big subject of this conference directly, but obviously, indirectly, it shades everything. President Obama was recently on the line with Chancellor Merkel and Monti and Hollande. How are you looking at this? President Obama made a strong statement on Europe's need to focus on pro-growth policies at the G8. You're seeing continued tension. So how does this impact U.S. relations with Europe, particularly as you're talking about economic statecraft and our effort to rebuild our own economy? Well, first of all, we should take a lesson in how you all have done here in Poland, because you've had unbelievable growth, obviously surpassing most of your friends in the EU, and quite frankly, over the last few years, the United States. And so we could probably take some lessons for how you manage that, which is obviously not always easy to do, but there's a balance between fiscal austerity and growth, and I think Poland's done a very nice job in making that balancing. And this is what Europe is going through as well. And as someone who spent, as Fred mentioned, the last decade in the financial service sector,
I'm well aware of how everything's interconnected. There's no longer just one country's problems. Greece's problems is Spain's problems, and Spain's problems is France's problems, and France's problems is Germany's problems. And I think the one lesson we learned in the crisis that began in 2007 on Wall Street and certainly spread throughout Europe and quite frankly through the global markets is all connected. The President's view has been the view that we have shared, where there's a balancing act between austerity measures, which you must take in a time of crisis and debt, as well as growth. And they're trying to find out that equilibrium. And I have enormous confidence that they will. This is a very difficult time. I'm confident that, that Merkel and the ECB and the leaders who are in better financial position than some of their others will understand the interconnectivity of what's going on. So we're confident that we will get through this. But make no mistake, it is a very, very painful process. Many of you who do business in Europe know this quite well. You pick up the newspapers, you can see what interest rates are doing. You can see these countries who are issuing bonds and the spreads in which they are issuing them at. We haven't seen some of these numbers in 30 years or 40 years. So we will get through this. And I say we because we're all connected to this. The health of the United States is very much linked to the health of Europe. Obviously, the health of Europe is where you're living today. So we are going to do everything we possibly can through encouragement and help through really the experience that we've been through. But I'm, again, confident after coming out of the G8 in Washington, then the NATO meetings, that they are very much focused on it. And I'm confident that we will be seeing over the next few weeks, again, some continue focus and attention on what needs to happen, especially on some of the countries that are having a more difficult time.
With your former investment banker hat on, looking at those spreads, I would assume concern is rising, however. What do you do to close those spreads?
Well, I mean, again, I think it is, you know, this is not a one-day fix. One of the lessons that we did learn in the crisis in 2008-9 is you do need a bazooka approach. You can't be incremental. As we learned when the Fed stepped in and secured the banks in the United States. Now, it's a lot easier when you have one Federal Reserve and you have institutions versus 17 countries. So understandably, it's much more difficult. But I think we've learned a lesson that you do need fairly dramatic support. And I think, and I do think that the ECB, Germany, some of the stronger players understand that. And I do believe over time you will see, again, the ability to address these issues on a one-to-one basis and a global problem.
I have a question on sanctions, and since you raised it, we've threatened, for example, Pakistan with sanctions for a gas line project with Iran. That didn't seem to work. Imposed sanctions on Belarus and Iran. Have those been successful? Some say Iran have been quite successful. Belarus, I don't know. What other economic tools do you have to work with when diplomatic relations are going south? And when you talk about economic statecraft, are you looking at it as both carrots and sticks?
Yeah, I mean, let me just talk a little bit, just a second, about economic statecraft. This is not a new. This is maybe a new term. It's certainly not a new activity. I don't want to overstate the fact that Barack Obama and Hillary Clinton woke up and realized that we can use diplomacy to affect economies. So that would be certainly an overstatement. I don't suggest to do that. We, although, to be honest, are emphasizing it more and more because, quite frankly, we have to. The economic situation in the United States is such that we need to be doing everything we possibly can to promote U.S. job creation, including using diplomacy effectively. To answer your question on the use of sanctions and other tools, I would argue that the sanctions, using Iran for an example, have worked extremely well. Obviously, at the end of the day, we'll see how everything shakes out as it relates to the current situation in Iran. But one of the reasons that the sanctions have been successful is we have had a unified worldview. I personally went around through much of Asia talking to countries who had huge amounts of oil coming in from Iran to the countries and the dependency on them, for them to dramatically cut back on their oil consumption and look for alternatives was not only important to put pressure on the Iranians, but also united the world on the pressure to putting on Iran. And it is having absolute significant impact on the Iranians. And I think it's an important tool, again, not only for the effect it has, but the galvanizing event it has by doing so. So there must be in diplomacy a carrot and a stick. We must use the sticks when we need to, and it doesn't always need to be with a military stick. One of the lessons that we learned, certainly in Libya, was the use of NATO and the use of our allies. It was something that we learned, that getting coalition partners together only makes us stronger. So we're learning that as we proceed. The world's complicated, Fred, as you all know, better than most. And we are attempting to address these issues in a very global-centric way, an attempt to try to come to, and I believe in a correct way, but try to get some solutions that make sense for the long haul and for the long-term benefit of the world.
Let me, in a final question, then drill down in a specific case on economic statecraft, because I think we, the Atlantic Council, are taken with this idea. But we're also taken with this idea in a multilateral sense, and particularly with our closest allies and friends, whether it has to do with Iran, whether it has to do with Belarus in a negative sense, or whether it has to do in a positive sense. Let's take two cases, and maybe we can close with this. One of them is NATO summit in Chicago. Allies agreed on an exit from Afghanistan, shift in responsibility of combat mission to Afghan forces next year. From an economic standpoint, what's your expectations for this transition? There's a lot of effort now to think about economic development afterwards. And should that be one of the main priorities, supporting this Afghan economy? Boom. So that's an outside of area economic statecraft challenge. And then there's how do we bolster our own largest economy in the world? There's a lot of talk about a revival of this idea of a deeper transatlantic economic partnership, investment treaty, free trade zone, all of that business. Is that important? Is that not important? How do you judge both of those issues going forward?
Well, let me just briefly talk about the Afghanistan, because this is a case where multilateralism, if I could coin the phrase, the NATO meetings in Chicago, not only in my humble view, were very successful, but it was successful to unite our ISAF and NATO partners on the long-term agenda for Afghanistan. We have, including many of the countries that are in this room, many of the places in where many of you live, have been partners with us. Poland, in particular, has had thousands of soldiers there helping us throughout this, and have committed over the long haul to be supportive in our efforts once our troops withdraw into a non-combat position, as you know, by 2014. One of the issues in which we are talking about is making sure that the coalition supports the ANSF, which is the Afghan National Security Forces. As you know, 75% of Afghanistan right now is under the control of the security of the Afghan National Security Forces, and obviously 2014, 100% will be left in the hands of the Afghans. One of the ideas was to get the support, the economic support, to pay for this. And through the NATO means, we were able to get most of our NATO allies and ISAF partners to agree to help fund the ANSF after 2014, and I'm very happy about that. Again, the United States still is going to be paying the largest sum of that, but having all of our partners, including that, is important. To answer your question on the second part of that equation is the assistance side. I can't emphasize how important that is. As the troops leave Afghanistan, and as the ISAF partners and the military begins to leave, we are a fundamental part of the economy. When you have 100,000 plus soldiers in a country and the United States spending almost $10 billion a month although obviously that money's not being spent on the economy, we are generating an enormous amount of economic stimulus in Afghanistan with a military operation. That is going to decline over time. So we need to make sure that we continue to support the economy within Afghanistan. I had an opportunity to spend some time with some of the individuals in this room to talk about the extracts and the mining capabilities. We've talked about creating the new Silk Road to allow us to have a development. The fact of the matter is that at the end of the day, the success of Afghanistan is not going to be how big we make the Afghan National Security Forces, about how we get this economy to be stable enough for the long term so we don't find ourselves in the same position that we were 10 years ago. At the end of the day, it's about the economy. Someone famous said it's about the economy, stupid. That is same is true in Afghanistan. We're not trying to create Jeffersonian democracies. What we're trying to create is a self-sustaining, self-protected Afghanistan and an economy that also is self-sustaining. And we will need to do that for the long term. So one of the meetings we're doing is we're going from here to Tokyo to meet with all of our ISAF and NATO allies to make sure they continue to support the economy in Afghanistan for rule of law, for infrastructure projects, for the ability to basically create an economy there that can be self-sustaining. So that's very important. It's a very good question. As it relates to Europe, just briefly, Europe is, we talk a lot about Asia and Asia pivot. The reality is, as I said in my speech, $3.5 billion a day in transatlantic trades going on with Europe, okay? That's it's a mind-numbing number, you know, 7 million jobs. I mean, Europe is our most trusted and most important trading partner. We know it, you all know it. We will continue to work on strengthening that relationship through a whole variety of means, including discussions around free trade zones and free trade agreements. But the most important thing for all of us to understand is our economies are completely and utterly linked to each other, and we understand that, and you understand that. So thank you.
Before I thank you, I just want to say to people, I think we're going from here, if I'm not mistaken, to breakout sessions. And you see it in your program, you know where to go, but we're running a little bit behind, so you can go straight to the rooms with your breakout sessions. With that logistical point given, let me thank you, not just on behalf of the audience, Atlantic Council, but personally from me. I know it's a long way to travel. I know the pressures that are on you every day in your day job. I think this was a really valuable session. The news on visa waiver push by the end of the year is quite interesting. But I think the economic statecraft issue is something we can all seize upon. We at the Atlantic Council have been talking about the notion and the concept of an economic NATO. Not that we want NATO to be necessarily take this on itself, but the fact that we have to think more and more of our economic assets as together as strategic assets that can be used in this really interesting time of inflection in the economy. So on behalf of the audience and everyone else, thank you so much for taking the time.
Ladies and gentlemen, please join us for the breakout session in conference rooms A, B, C, D, and restaurant.